Tournament Fighter, otherwise known simply as the fighting game, is the definitive pick up and play arcade style game. It's easy to pick up, yet it's difficult to master and champion. My name is Antony Jefferson, and it is my job today to take you through a slightly comprehensive look, as well as give you a basic introduction into the modern day fighting game. Without further ado, here are the credits. To begin our overview and our slight analysis of the modern day fighter, we need to first of all establish the platforms on which these games will be featured on. We will be focusing on the modern day consoles, otherwise known as the 7th generation of home console. They are the Microsoft Xbox 360, the Sony PlayStation 3 and the Nintendo Wii. Fighters in the modern day have had to take inspiration and technical data from older fighting games, both from the era of the arcade and the era of earlier home consoles. This could include the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on where you're from, and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, simply known by its initials, the SNES, or its shortened version, the SNES. If any of these so-called inspirations are at all featured in the modern day fighter, I will show you them and I will explain them. However, our main focus will be on the modern day fighting games. So, without further ado, let us begin by looking at Skullgirls, the most recently released fighting game. Skullgirls is the independently developed and critically acclaimed fighting game that launched in April of 2012 on the PlayStation Network and the Xbox Live Arcade, and has a scheduled PC release later in 2012. It was developed by Reverge Labs and published by both Autumn Games and Konami, a somewhat powerful name in the gaming industry, having produced the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game and video game series, as well as the Dance Dance Revolution Empire, or DDR, as many referred to the popular arcade dancing machines. Skullgirls has been very well received in the fighting game community, or FGC for short, as a superb fighting game, rivaling, and in some people's opinions beating, the bigger named companies and their fighters like SNK and Capcom, whose games we will be covering shortly. Skullgirls' main mechanic is that of a team-based combat, which was first popularized by the SNK game King of Fighters, wherein the player picked a team of 3 characters to fight on one team, and was the first use of internal crossovers due to the cast being made of characters both for the King of Fighters series as well as other SNK video games. Skullgirls' team-based combat, however, is slightly different to that of others, where in games like King of Fighters and Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 you have no choice but to pick 3 characters. Skullgirls allows you to pick anywhere from 1 to 3, with each combination of teams having its advantage and disadvantage. So, for example, a team of 1 character will have more health and more power than a team of 2. However, a team of 2 means that you can mix up your fighting style and also have assists, meaning that you can make moves that would normally be punishable, not punishable, thus covering your bases. And it can also lead to a variety of stratagems. Due to its independent nature, Skullgirls has included a lot of homages and fan services to other fighting games, and didn't get into trouble for it because it's not like, you know, a bigger company copying, pasting from another company. These homages include color palettes to look like other fighters like Ryu or Ken from the Street Fighter series, or in the moves themselves. For one example, the Catwoman character thing, for lack of a better term, Miss Fortune, her hyper combination, or one of her hyper combination, is called Berserker Barrage, and she even shouts it as she claws away at someone's face. This was an attack made famous by the Marvel vs. Capcom series as Wolverine's hyper combination, of the same name. Skullgirls, within 2 to 3 weeks of its initial release of 2012 April, as stated, as selling over 50,000 downloaded units on both the PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade combined, which is an amazing amount of support shown from the fighting game community, and has been scoring very highly in the reviews, getting anywhere from mid 80s to high 90s. The game sports such fans as Justin Wong, Micah Ross, and Peter Rosas, aka the Combo Fiend, who are all kind of big celebrities within the fighting game scene. Skullgirls has had so much support from the fans that Reverge Labs now offer the chance to make customized items such as hoodies, t-shirts, mugs, etc., featuring the characters and logos of the game. They've been actually selling very well. According to Reverge Labs, over 10,000 orders for customized options have been received already, and they're working around the clock to ensure everybody gets their orders ASAP. So, as a newly released title, Skullgirls definitely looks to be on the right track. Capcom, let's not beat about the bush, has had a dominating chokehold on the fighting game scene since 1992, when Street Fighter II hit arcades and revolutionized not only fighting games as a whole, but also competitive and casual gaming as well. Capcom were the pioneers of most fighting game conventions, like hyper combination attacks, which they popularized in Marvel vs. Capcom and Street Fighter III, external crossover games which have led to Marvel vs. Capcom, Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, Street Fighter Cross Tekken, etc., and have generally been the forefront of the fighting game scene. Let us firstly take a look at their games on the PS3 and 360, Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, and Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Starting of course with Super Street Fighter 4. Street Fighter as a series has been dominating and the popular fighting game scene market since 1992, with the introduction of Street Fighter 2 in arcades, and has been released several times over with Super, Turbo, and more recently as a HD remix as a downloadable title on the PS3 and Xbox 360. It was the first fighting game where players were allowed to choose their characters as opposed to having pre-selected ones, and to also have different styles incorporated into the one game. Such examples of this are Balrog's boxing, Zangief's wrestling, and Ryu and Ken's Shoto is what it's called, style of fightings. Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition was released 8 months after Super Street Fighter 4, which is released a number of months after Street Fighter 4, seeing a pattern here, and fixed a lot of the problems people found in both versions, such as bugs in the game, lack of roster, that players asked for their characters to be included, etc., etc. All in all, the grand total of characters in Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition is 39 characters, one of the biggest rosters in a fighting game to date, only being outdone by Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which is, again, done by Capcom themselves. Super Street Fighter 4 was the first Street Fighter title to use 2.5D, which is basically 3D models on a 2D playing field. A concept first introduced in the game Super Smash Bros. On the Nintendo 64, which used polygons and not pixels to be used as stages, fighters, backgrounds, etc., making it the first of its kind. Super Street Fighter 4 pretty much uses the same formula as it did back in the early 90s. Hit your opponent until their health reaches 0, or until the timer runs out and whoever has the most health wins after that. However, certain mechanics have been carried over since other Street Fighter games, such as EX moves from Street Fighter 3, the combo system in Street Fighter 2, and the ultra combinations found in Street Fighter 3. And Super Street Fighter 4 basically took everything that was good about the previous Street Fighter games and put it into one. It has sold over 2.2 million units worldwide, and this does not include arcade cabinet sales, and is currently one of the most popular tournament games on the market, being featured in tournaments such as EVO, which is the world's biggest fighting games tournament and is often held in Las Vegas, Nevada, Wednesday Night Fights, a weekly to bi-weekly tournament held in America, and Shadowloo Showdown, an invitational international tournament held in Australia, and showcases the best talent in the world along with EVO. And it brings champions together from all over the world, such as Mike Ross, Justin Wong, etc. Capcom's other more popular game on the market at the moment is Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 on both, again, the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. The franchise as a whole, it's known for its over-the-top, wacky, and somewhat confusing gameplay. The series, I believe people can technically say, started in the arcade cabinets of 1996, when Capcom signed a deal with Marvel to make and publish X-Men vs. Street Fighter, wherein 8 of the more popular characters from both franchises, which including at the time Ryu, Magneto, Wolverine, Cammy, Ken and Rogue, in a tag team styled fighting game, the first of its kind with external tag team fighting. Due to the success of the machine, it was ported to both the Sega Saturn, but in Japan only, and the PlayStation. But due to technology restraints, the tag team feature was omitted in the PlayStation version. And it was due to the success of this particular game that it led to other external crossover titles, much like Marvel vs. Capcom, Marvel vs. SNK, and Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is the 4th in the Marvel vs. Capcom series, and was met on mixed opinion due to the timing of release and the characters they did and did not include, including Phoenix Wright, Hawkeye for inclusion, and exclusion of Mega Man and Gambit. It follows very much in the same vein as the other games in the series, having the team-based mechanics, hyper combinations, over-the-top action that the series is famous for, and as a complete contrast for the chess match mechanics of Super Street Fighter 4, with it being fast-paced and in your face, as opposed to somewhat relaxed and being about footsies and trying to find the chinks in your opponent's armor. The game itself is popular, if not a little controversial, again because of character choices and for a few other factors as well. Yes, it provides great action and hype, as the FGC calls it, yet due to the inclusion of a mechanic called X Factor and a few other game mechanics like Albert Wesker's glasses, which could eventually lead to a level 4 X Factor. This is also known as Dark Wesker Rises. People have kind of been teetering on the edge, really. But despite its flaws, they have become quite endearing to the game, and the crowd surrounding it have actually made fun of the game, but have totally embraced it. The X Factor itself is a comeback mechanic that people seem to love or hate, a bit like Marmite, and the game itself has come up with a few jokes, like Dark Wesker Rises, and a few other bits and pieces as well. Much like Super Street Fighter 4, Ultimate Marvel 3, to give it its shortened name, operates in a 2.5D perspective, using 3D models, characters, environments, etc., but on a 2D playing field, which means they only play along the X and the Y axes. A widely popularized opinion is that has been circulating in the FGC for some time, even given the backing of some of the bigger fighting game community celebrities like Mike Ross and Finger Cramps Jago, is that Tatsunoko vs. Capcom on the Nintendo Wii is an underrated and overlooked gem, and it scores very highly in reviews. However, due to it being on a console that was labelled as casual, that isn't as powerful as the Xbox 360, and that people don't seem to be taking too seriously, it doesn't get the screen time it deserves. Capcom took a massive risk, and it was actually quite risky to localize Tatsunoko vs Capcom outside of Japan, due to the fact that hardly anybody, if anybody, had ever heard of Tatsunoko Productions, and as such might have resulted in poor sales figures. However, due to the high level of anticipation and numerous conventions, the game was eventually released overseas and saw a tremendous amount of praise and won numerous awards, including the 2009 E3 Best Fighting Game Award, and showcased heroes and villains of the Tatsunoko library to a new audience, and according to sources, some players were even inspired to check out some of Tatsunoko's productions and shows, and have even taken a liking to them. Tatsunoko vs Capcom, or TVC for short, uses a similar control method to Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3, and uses a similar tag team mechanic to X-Men vs Street Fighter with 2-on-2 action, and like Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3, uses 2.5D mechanics. Again, 3D models, environments, etc. on a 2D playing field, and pushes the Wii to its limits in terms of graphical and gameplay potential. However, a common positive is that people say how smoothly the game runs despite its strain, and it seems to cope very well. However, a common complaint about the game is that the Wi-Fi/online aspect can be very laggy or slow, skipping frames and ultimately providing a subpar experience. However, given that the game is quite popular, if not shown on stream, or streams, tournaments, etc., people don't seem to mind this too much. So it may be a complaint, but it's kind of one that's, I wouldn't say falling on deaf ears, but I would say one that doesn't deter people from playing the game. Recently, for both the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, was Capcom's latest fighting game, Foray. Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which combined the two worlds of Street Fighter and Tekken, a popular 3D game series from Namco, and who are also responsible for the Soul Calibur series. This is not the first game, however, that both companies have collaborated on. Before Street Fighter Cross Tekken, or SFXTK to give its abbreviated version, although I personally will still be saying Street Fighter Cross Tekken, was Namco Cross Capcom on the PlayStation 2, a Japan-only release that combined not only the worlds of Street Fighter and Tekken, but other popular franchises from both sides, like Mega Man, Ghouls and Ghosts, or Ghouls and Goblins, depending on where you're from, Dig Dug, Soul Calibur, Darkstalkers. It was huge. It was a combined RPG and fighting game, so you move pieces on a board in a similar style to onto the Nintendo Game Boy Advance game, Advanced Wars. However, when enemies engage one another, instead of having you outside of the action, you take direct control of the character engaging in battle, or characters in some cases, and you've got to perform specific commands to have them attack, like Ryu's Hadouken was quarter circle forward attack, Hagar was half circle back attack for pile driver, I believe, or something like that, and you also got to take control of them when they were defending as well. Really quite good game, actually, if only it was localized over here. Through the game of Namco Cross Capcom, and many years later, Capcom and Namco teamed up again to bring us Street Fighter Cross Tekken, a fully fledged fighting game that, much like Tatsunoko and Marvel vs Capcom 3, takes place in 2.5Ds. It uses a more refined version of the Super Street Fighter 4 engine and incorporated several Tekken mechanics into the game as well, like combinations, ground bounces, air juggles, and specific command trees for the Tekken cast, which makes them more versatile and evens up the odds between them and the Street Fighter cast. The game itself has been met with good reviews and overall praise from both professional and casual fighting game fans. However, one common complaint, amongst others, is the oversaturation of timeout victories, both on and offline. However, Capcom have said they hope to address the online timeout issue further on in the game's lifespan, and tournaments have actually taken to removing the timeout win aspect. So give them points on that one. However, the game also introduced a new spin on the comeback mechanic in the form of Pandora, where the on-point or the on-screen character at the time for one team sacrifices themselves to make their partner stronger and to give them unlimited EX and super moves. However, this only lasts for 10 seconds, and if the player who first activated Pandora does not win in those 10 seconds, then that player loses. Seth Killian, special advisor to Capcom, said once that this mode was an unholy gamble, a make or break situation that only a player can utilize when on the very edge of oblivion. And nobody has disagreed. Only 1 to 2 people that anybody has ever seen has ever managed to use Pandora to even a fraction of its fullest potential at the moment. However, with constant new strategies being thought up, with new DLC gems being released, that could very well change in the future. Continuing our talk on Namco, now Namco Bandai, they have the esteemed honour of owning the 2 biggest franchises in the 3D fighting genre. Tekken, which we will be covering now, and Soul Calibur, which we'll be covering in a short while. Namco, in order to compete with Capcom and to keep up with Sega, needed to keep ahead of the arcade fighting game craze, and so brought out their own 3-dimensional fighter in 1994, named Tekken, or Iron Fist is its Japanese name, and introduced a more fully fledged and more profound story that had recently been found in the likes of Street Fighter 2 or Virtua Fighter. I mean, Virtua Fighter didn't have a story, and Street Fighter 2 was evil bad guy running tournament, go beat him up. It has consistently scored very highly in reviews, with scores ranging from high 80s to high 90s. Since its initial release, it has been improved on in every sequel, finally culminating in Tekken 6 for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, which has been very well received by fans of Tekken and fighting game enthusiasts alike. However, like Tatsunoko vs Capcom, it does not get as much screen time on streams and tournaments, and is not as prominent in tournaments anymore. It is not a headliner, is all I'm saying, but that looks to change in the coming months, as Tekken Tag Tournament 2 looks to revamp the series again. In many people's opinions, although Tekken was not the original 3D fighting game, it was certainly better and far superior to Sega's Virtua Fighter and Virtua Fighter 2 in every way, and has since sported numerous spin-off products, such as films, anime, and even a comic book series. As of April 2012, the Tekken franchise has sold over 40 million units worldwide. This includes both console and arcade units. As mentioned before, Namco also owns the Soul Calibur series, which began in 1996 under the title of Soul Edge. A sequel in 1998 was then made and ported to both PlayStation and Dreamcast, owned by Sega, called Soul Calibur, and thus the console series of fighters was born. Much like Tekken before it, Soul Calibur took the time to develop a story and introduce a number of recognizable characters that include the Azure Knight of Nightmare, Taki the Ninja, and Astaroth, otherwise known as the Grim Reaper of the Battlefield. It has become a popular series of video games. However, Soul Calibur 4 is considered to be the weakest due to several gameplay mechanics and the inclusion of guest characters from the Star Wars universe. Yoda, Darth Vader, and the Apprentice from Force Unleashed. However, a redeeming factor is that Soul Calibur 2, released on the PlayStation 2, the original Xbox, and the Nintendo GameCube, was one of the strongest according to Harada-san of Namco, and it had guest characters in it: Link for the GameCube, Heihachi Mishima of Tekken for PlayStation 2, and Spawn for the Xbox. But it wasn't just because of those characters that the game failed. As I said before, it was gameplay, the lack of speed, and the creator character was a little awkward. However, there have been small changes throughout the series in every game, and not just in design aesthetics, but again in gameplay, in speed, in technical hoo-ha that I have absolutely no idea about. But the most recent additions came in Soul Calibur 5, the most recent of games, and the most notable of these changes is, well, for lack of a better term, EX moves, which are called Brave Edge moves, and hyper combos called Critical Edges, which allow for comebacks and extended combos and greater damage upon an opponent, which kinda makes the point that Capcom got it right with including those kind of moves to begin with, so people could copy them. Sorry about that, Namco. It also includes a new quick step system, which is a fast quick stepping dodge move, which is quicker than just using the traditional 8-way run system, which was introduced in Soul Calibur. Soul Calibur 5 has been met with great praise and has been said to replicate the fast-paced action of golden olden days of Soul Calibur 2. And recently, the World Championships of Soul Calibur 5 concluded in Westminster, London, on April 10th, 2012, with Omega DR taking the championship, playing as the Azure Knight himself, Nightmare. SNK Playmore is a somewhat overlooked company, and its series of 13 fighting games, King of Fighters, or KOF for short, have always been overshined by Capcom and other companies like Namco. King of Fighters hit the stores in 2011 for both the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, and continues the tradition of 3 vs 3 tournament fighting with characters from other SNK games like Terry Bogard, King, and Mai. The story is one of the most well-developed in any fighting game series, with well-developed motives, characters that are defined, and the settings are unique and interesting, leading to many praising it for not only its art design, smooth animation and gameplay, but also for its single-player experience, which is where most fighting games can fall down. King of Fighters is a series of two-dimensional fighting games with backgrounds that are designed to look 3D but are actually drawn in 2D. It's quite clever, actually. This makes it vastly different from other games on the market, whether it be like the 2.5D games of Capcom with Super Street Fighter and Marvel, or Namco with their fully 3D games like Tekken 6. Taking cues from both its own past and the recent success of Street Fighter 4, King of Fighters 13 also includes EX moves and hyper combination moves, but also include its own combination system into it, allowing for HD cancels, HD moves, which eventually mean that you can extend your combos and do more damage. Basically, King of Fighters has put their own spin on the whole combo system. It's quite clever, actually. The game far exceeded the fans' expectations of the game and sold over 25,500 copies on both consoles in the first several weeks of its release. It is still popular in the tournament scene and sees a greater audience interest than some Capcom and even some Namco games as well. Nintendo. Even when you hear the name, you automatically think video games and Mario as its mascot, along with a variety of other popular characters like Kirby, Pikachu, Yoshi, Luigi, Link, Zelda, Samus Aran, etc, etc. But in 1999, a game was released on the Nintendo 64 called Super Smash Bros., and fighting game innovation and changes were born. Super Smash Bros. Is vastly different from any other fighting game either seen before it or after it. It was the first game to use 2.5D fighting game mechanics, using polygons instead of pixels in what was essentially a 2D fighting game, a trend to be later picked up by Capcom and other companies. It was the first game to not use the traditional health gauge or health bar, but instead use a damage percentage system, wherein when you are attacked, that gauge increases. The more percent you have, the easier it is for your opponents to knock you out of the ring and score a point. It was the first fighting games to use items, and was the first to introduce other game modes into its own fighting formula, like the coin battle, where when you hit opponents, coins pop out of them and you collect those coins. The winner is whoever has the most coins at the end. And the stock battle, which is where you have a set number of lives. Once you lose those lives, it's game over. Super Smash Bros. Grew in popularity, and so a sequel was inevitable. Super Smash Bros. Melee was released on the GameCube as a launch title in 2005 and surpassed its predecessor, and is still considered by many Smash fans, as they're called, to be the best of the 3 games released so far, for its balanced gameplay, quick pace, and ultimately fun factor. Super Smash Bros. Brawl was released 3 years later in 2008 and was met again with mixed opinion. People praised it for being a continuation of the Smash Bros. Franchise and for having a deeper single player experience as opposed to just the wishy-washy one of the previous 2 games. And with the inclusion of the silent-ish story of the Subspace Emissary. Essentially a story with no dialogue, yet sound effects and music, telling of each hero and each villain's place in the Smash Bros. Universe, before they all combine their strength to combat the villain which has been pulling the strings and manipulating the universe. It's quite good actually, I'll admit. However, it was criticised for a rather bad physics engine, character unbalance such as Meta Knight and Pit, and stages being too big like the new Pork City stage. Also for including a ridiculous gameplay mechanic known as tripping, wherein sometimes when you were trying to make a character run across the stage, they would trip over themselves, thus leaving them in a completely defenseless state. Many people didn't like that, and as such Brawl did not become a tournament game. However, since its release, a devoted global group of modders, or modifiers, have called themselves Project M, or Project Melee, and have devoted their time and energy for the past 4 years to producing a legal modification for the game, meaning you don't have to change anything in your Wii console, to make the game more like Melee. And it has been met with extremely positive reviews. It is not yet complete, however they have released several demos, and every one of the demos has been met with very high praise. The community is hailing it as Melee version 1.5 and calling the modification better than the Brawl itself. Project M, in a nutshell, have taken characters and stages from Brawl, as well as older games like the original Smash Bros. And Melee, and have modified them to better suit a Melee style of faster paced action, and have devoted their time to making the game more balanced as well, such as changing various properties of moves such as frame data, knockback, stun state, etc. An example of this is replacing King Dedede's super armor on his recovery up B move to light armor, meaning that if he's struck with anything lighter than a jab, he'll be knocked out of the move. Or the team have gone to the trouble of replacing moves altogether, Wario's forward smash attack used to be a shoulder barge that was inspired by his WarioWare games. Now, why all of Wario's moves were inspired by WarioWare is beyond anybody. So, this team took Wario's moveset from Wario Land and have incorporated it into his moves. Now, what used to be a shoulder barge is now a funny little kick that was like a finishing move in Wario Land. Overall, Brawl, without the modification, is not a technical fighting game along the lines of Street Fighter or King of Fighters. However, it is a unique type of fighting game that has its own subgenre, and tournaments do go on for the game, yet they are very few and very far between. However, people in the Smash Bros. Community have been saying, due to the positivity that has resided from Project M, once it's completed, and if the next iteration of Smash Bros. Is not up to snuff, then Project M itself will become the next tournament standard for the Smash Bros. Series. Wow. For a community-driven mod to take priority over the actual game itself, that is a lot of praise. I've seen the stuff for Project M personally, and it looks great. Now, throughout this video, you've heard me talk and you've seen me show you retro fighters like Street Fighter 2, Smash Bros. On the Nintendo 64, and a King of Fighters. And you may be asking why, despite the fact I've already said it once before in the video. Aside from pointing out where some changes in the fighting games market may have happened, I was also building up to this moment in time. Many people believe that the older retro fighting games have their own uniqueness, and it's true, they do, and they have become very nostalgic to a lot of people. Others also say that they are more technical, and as such are slightly harder to play, yet more enjoyable as you're having to work harder to gain a greater reward. I kind of tend to agree yet disagree. I'm very political like that. Gaming companies like Nintendo and Capcom heard the cries of their fans, and in recent years have re-released older fighting games on the PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade, as well as tablets and androids, like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Street Fighter 3, which got online editions built into it and became Third Strike Online Edition, and also the old Smash Bros. 64 was released on the Wii in 2010, and the SNES versions of Street Fighter 2 and its subsequent sequels were also ported to the Wii as well. A HD remix, though, was ported to PS Network and the Xbox Live Arcade. So, although those older games may have outlived their arcade life, there is still a lot of love out there for them, and people download them daily. Just goes to show you, games may go old, but there will always be love for them. Always. Which is always good to see, if I'm honest. I mean, I'm quite a fan of the older fighting games as well, so I'm quite happy about that, to be quite fair. Quite happy indeed. Well, as a small look into the modern day fighter, I think it's about time we wrap this up. Thank you very much for watching and listening to me. I know it must have been hard on you. And we hope you can tune in for future installments of this show, where I'll be covering more topics and going a little bit deeper into each of the games individually. But for now, it's farewell and goodbye. This is Antony Jefferson for AntmanMovies.com.